If you have a relative who is not independent and always depends on you, how will you deal with that situation? Here's my story. The moment I realized my sister was using me, I never imagined that a simple text from Uncle Ray could turn my world upside down. After a long day at work, all I wanted was to unwind with a simple dinner and my favorite movie, like I always did. But when my phone buzzed with his message, "You need to see this, ally. I'm sorry," I knew something was wrong. Uncle Ray rarely sent unexpected messages, and he was definitely not the type to be vague. A sinking feeling settled in my chest as I tapped on the attached video. The familiar sight of my parents' backyard filled the screen, the place where they often hosted weekend gatherings. Then I saw Amber, my sister, lounging comfortably on a patio chair, a glass of wine in her hand, looking completely at ease. Ally is too stupid to kick me out. She just lets me live there for free like an idiot. The words hit me like a slap to the face. I stared at the screen, barely able to process what I was hearing. But it didn't stop there. Amber shrugged nonchalantly and continued. "She actually thinks I'm struggling. My poor sister. I make way more money than she even knows. But why should I waste my money on rent when that fool lets me live there for free?" Laughter erupted. Not just from Amber, but from Matt, her cousin Lindsay, her best friend, and even my father. A knowing, complicit laugh. My chest tightened. I played the video again. Then again. And again. Each time, Amber's words cut deeper. 3 years. For the past 3 years, I had let Amber live in my house for free. When she had called me, sobbing after a bad breakup, telling me she'd been kicked out of her apartment with nowhere to go, I didn't hesitate to take her in. No rent, no utility payments, just a place to get back on her feet. And now I was the idiot? I thought I would explode, storm into her room, shove the video in her face, demand an explanation, but I didn't. Instead, a cold, calculated anger settled over me, replacing the hurt. I texted Uncle Ray back. "Thank you. Don't say anything to her, I'll handle it." I didn't call Amber out. I didn't ask for an explanation. I didn't need to hear any more lies. Instead, I started planning. The next morning, I woke up as usual, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. Amber walked in, looking completely relaxed, blissfully unaware that I had seen the truth. "Morning," she yawned, stretching. "God, that bed in your guest room is so comfy. I slept like a baby." I chuckled, setting my coffee down. "That's good. A good night's sleep is important." She didn't notice anything different. Still smiling, still acting like she had me wrapped around her finger, still believing I would let her use me forever. I made small talk, asked about her job, pretended to be interested in her stories. But all I could hear in my head were her words from the video. "So any plans for this month?" I asked casually. Amber shrugged, lazily scrolling through her phone. Work is crazy, and everything is just so expensive these days. Who has time to even think about that?" I nodded, then said as naturally as if I were commenting on the weather. "I think it's time you start paying rent." The words dropped like a stone into still water. Amber froze, eyes widening. "You're joking, right?" "No." I met her gaze, unwavering. $1,200 a month? Starting next month. Amber laughed, but this time it was forced. "Come on, Ally. We're family." I set my coffee down, tilting my head slightly. "Yeah, but you're living here like a tenant, so why not pay rent like one?" Her face darkened. "I can't believe you're doing this to me, after everything." Everything? What exactly did she mean by everything? The 3 years I had taken care of her, while she gave me nothing but contempt? The fact that she thought I was too stupid to ever stand up for myself? But I didn't say any of that. I just smiled and said, "I just wanted to give you a heads up so you can plan your finances accordingly." Amber didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at me, as if waiting for me to break the silence. But I didn't. Because this time, I was in control. She had no idea that she had just destroyed her own little scheme. and I wasn't going to let myself be used ever again. I couldn't sleep that night. The room was quiet, dimly lit by the soft glow of my nightlight, but my mind was racing like a storm. Amber's words echoed in my head, replaying over and over like a broken record. Ally is too stupid to kick me out. She just lets me live there for free like an idiot. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my body still, but my thoughts in constant motion. I could feel my heartbeat, no longer aching with pain but pulsing with a new determination. The anger wasn't raging anymore, but it was settling, quiet, steady, and absolute. I didn't want to confront her, didn't need to hear Amber spin some excuse to cover it all up. She had done just fine for herself these past 3 years. But now, I was no longer the fool. What I needed wasn't a dramatic confrontation, not an argument that Amber could twist into making herself the victim. No, this time I needed something concrete. A plan. I sat up and opened my laptop. In the darkness, the screen cast a cold glow, reflecting my calm, collected face. I began searching for things I had never considered before. Property management companies, rental agreements, legal procedures for ending an unjust tenancy. I read, I took notes, I researched landlord rights. If Amber wanted to act like an entitled stranger, I would treat her like an actual tenant. With every click, I felt like I was cutting the invisible strings that had tied me down for the past 3 years. No longer the obedient sister, no longer the one who blindly prioritized family. I was taking back control. The morning of reckoning. The next morning, as Amber strolled into the kitchen with her usual carefree attitude, I remained composed. She poured herself some milk, grabbed my cookies, completely oblivious to the fact that her reign as the queen without a throne was about to end. I carefully observed her reaction when I first brought up the idea of moving out. Predictably, Amber dismissed it outright, citing her busy schedule and how expensive rent was. She still thought I was the same person I had been yesterday, someone easily swayed by her words. But I wasn't. I think it's time you start paying rent. The words hit like a stone dropping into a still pond. I saw the flicker of confusion in Amber's eyes. For 3 years, I had never asked her to contribute a single dollar. To her, this was unthinkable. She tried to laugh it off, but it was forced. You're joking, right? No. Amber frowned, eyes flashing with suspicion but not real concern. She flipped her hair, crossing her arms. We're family. Are you really going to do this to me? I smiled. Exactly. Because we're family, I let you live here for free for 3 years. But now that's enough. Amber glared at me, but I didn't look away. For the first time, I saw her register the change in me. But instead of accepting it, she chose anger. You've really changed. She shook her head, disappointed, as if I was the villain in this story. But I wasn't betraying anyone. I was just reclaiming what was mine. The waiting game. Over the next few days, Amber avoided me. She no longer lounged on my couch watching Netflix until late at night. No longer left a mess in my kitchen as if it were her home. Now she moved through the house cautiously, deliberately distant. But I knew. It wasn't guilt. Amber was simply waiting. She assumed that if she kept her distance long enough, I would feel bad and take it all back. But she was wrong. The first of the month arrived, and Amber made no mention of rent. She was certain I would forget, that I wasn't serious about following through. But when her phone rang that morning, I knew the moment of truth had arrived. She stormed into the living room, phone in hand, eyes wide with shock. Ally? What is this? I took a sip of my coffee, unfazed. That's your lease agreement. Amber's eyes flickered with panic as she read the email. I had officially hired a property management company to handle everything. The contract stated that she owed $1,200 a month, with the first payment due today. You can't do this, Amber nearly shouted. You never told me. I set my coffee down calmly. I told you a month ago. You just didn't listen. Amber shook her head, scrambling for a way out. But this time, there was none. She placed her phone down, exhaling as if she were dealing with something absurd. Then, her voice softened. Ally, please. I've been going through a really rough time. Work has been stressful, and I really didn't mean what I said in that video. Oh, there it was. The victim act. I looked at her, still composed. The issue isn't that you don't have the money, it's that you don't want to pay, right? Amber's eyes flickered. No, I mean, I just thought I didn't have to. I gave a small, knowing smile. That's the problem. She went silent. After a moment, she switched tactics. Ally, I know I said those words in the video, but I didn't really mean them. You know I was just joking, right? I tilted my head, studying her. Really? Let me ask you this. If that video never existed, would you ever have considered contributing? Amber stiffened. I didn't need her answer. We both knew it was no. Pushing Amber to the edge. Amber clenched her fists, then lightly slammed them on the table. Are you really gonna kick me out over some stupid video? I didn't answer. No, you have two options. Sign the lease and start paying, or find somewhere else to live. Amber locked eyes with me. And if I don't do either? I turned to her. Then in 14 days, you'll receive a formal eviction notice. And if you still refuse to leave, I'll file a legal eviction lawsuit. Amber's face turned pale. She shot up from her seat, grabbing her bag. I'm not signing that damn lease. I'm going to talk to Mom and Dad. I shrugged. Go ahead. I already knew what would happen next. Amber would run to my parents, twisting the story to make me look cruel, while painting herself as the helpless victim. But this time, I didn't care. I had waited long enough. Your turn. What do you think? Many people believe that because we're family, we have to tolerate everything they do to us. That because of circumstances, we should give in. But I believe that family should mean mutual respect, not a one-sided convenience. Amber had 3 years to get on her feet, but she never did, because she knew I would never push her out of her comfort zone. But that ended today. If you were in my position, do you think I did the right thing? Have you ever dealt with someone like Amber in your life? And if so, how did you handle it? The collapse of Amber. I'm no longer the fool. Amber stormed out of the house in rage. I wasn't surprised. I had expected this. Amber never faced problems, she only ran from them. If backed into a corner, she did 2 things. Find someone to complain to, manipulate emotions to get what she wanted. And right on cue, 2 hours later, Mom called. The call from Mom, another emotional trap. I stared at the phone screen as my mother's name popped up. I was ready for this showdown. I took a deep breath and answered. The call from Mom, another emotional trap. Hello, Mom. Ally? I just spoke to Amber. Her voice had changed, not exactly angry, but full of implication. I could already picture Amber, eyes brimming with tears, spinning a dramatic tale about how I had cruelly abandoned my own sister over a small misunderstanding. Oh. I kept my tone calm. Did you really send her a lease agreement? Yes, Mom. I made it very clear to Amber. If she wants to stay, she has to pay rent. If not, she's free to find another place. Silence. Ally, do you really need to do this? Yes, Mom. Amber has had 3 years to take care of herself. She's not financially struggling, she's taking advantage of me. I can't let it continue. But she's your sister. Family is supposed to help each other. I clenched my phone tightly. I did help Amber for 3 years, without asking for anything. But she didn't appreciate it, Mom. And more importantly, did she tell you why I decided to charge her rent? Mom hesitated. I knew Amber would never mention the video. All I know is that she's really upset. She says she has nowhere to go. I let out a quiet laugh. That's not true. I actually found a few apartments within her budget. She just doesn't want to spend her own money. This time, Mom was completely silent. Finally, she sighed. So you're really not going to change your mind? No, Mom. Then, I guess you've made your decision. She didn't sound happy, but she wasn't fighting me anymore. Amber had expected Mom to make me cave, to guilt-trip me into backing down. But this time, I wasn't backing down. Amber returns. She no longer controls me. 3 days later, just before midnight, I heard the front door open. Amber was back. I sat on the couch pretending to read as she walked in. Her hair was messy, her face no longer carrying the smug confidence she once had. She threw her bag onto the table, arms crossed. "We need to talk." I closed my book and looked up. "I'm listening." Amber bit her lip, clearly trying to find a way to spin this in her favor. "I've been thinking a lot, and maybe I overreacted." I waited. "But I really don't have the money right now. I just need a little more time." I raised an eyebrow. "Then why did you just buy VIP tickets for next month's music festival?" Amber froze. It was clear as day. She had the money, she just didn't want to spend it on rent. I stood up, crossing my arms. "Amber, I'm not your ATM. You have two choices. Sign the lease and pay like an adult, or move out." She took a deep breath. "I can't believe you're doing this to me." I shrugged. "Then don't believe it, but it doesn't change anything." Amber stared at me for a long moment before turning on her heel and slamming the door to her room. But I knew this was no longer her home. A message to those being used by family. In the US, many adults remain trapped in unfair family dynamics. We're raised to believe we must help family, but helping doesn't mean allowing yourself to be used. Amber never appreciated me. She simply believed she was entitled to my help forever. But I learned an important lesson. Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. It helps you take back control of your life. I know many of you reading this have been in similar situations. If someone, family or friend, is using you, remember, you have the right to say no. You have the right to protect your space. You have the right to set boundaries. And most importantly, you have the right to demand respect. If someone only sees your kindness as something to exploit, then maybe it's time for them to learn how to stand on their own. As for me, I have no regrets. And for the first time in 3 years, I finally feel free. The end. Taking back control. The next morning, Amber packed her things. No big scene, no emotional speech, no last-minute argument. She simply stuffed her clothes into a suitcase, clothes she never thought she'd have to pack. I stood in the living room doorway, coffee in hand, silently watching. A part of me wondered, did she regret it? Did she wish she had respected my kindness? Or did she still see herself as the victim, convinced that I had betrayed her? I guessed it didn't matter anymore. As Amber wheeled her suitcase to the door, she paused for a moment, glancing back at me. Her eyes weren't angry anymore, but they weren't grateful either. "I'm leaving." I nodded. "Good luck." Amber pressed her lips together as if she wanted to say something, but in the end she just turned and walked out. No one was waiting for her, no shoulder to lean on. And for the first time in her life, Amber had to fend for herself. The door shut behind her, and I stood still for a moment, listening to the silence that filled the house. No more TV blasting until late at night, no more empty coffee cups left in the sink, no more feeling like a guest in my own home. I set my coffee down and took a deep breath. I had won. Freedom. Finally reclaimed. A week later, Uncle Ray stopped by. As he stepped inside, he glanced around and smiled. "Looks like things are much more peaceful now." I chuckled. Much more peaceful. We sat in the living room, my living room, no longer occupied by Amber. Uncle Ray looked at me with quiet understanding. "So how do you feel?" I thought for a moment before answering honestly. "Relieved." He nodded. "You did the right thing, ally. Setting boundaries isn't wrong, and if someone doesn't respect your boundaries, they don't deserve your compromises." I knew he was right. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't the bad guy. I was simply someone who had grown tired of being used, and had finally chosen to stand up for myself. The lesson on boundaries and standing firm life teaches us that kindness isn't always met with gratitude, especially within family. We grow up believing that helping our relatives is our duty, but sometimes kindness is taken for granted. If we don't set boundaries, we risk becoming prisoners in our own lives. The key lesson here is, helping doesn't mean allowing yourself to be exploited. You have the right to say no without guilt. You have the right to demand respect, even from family. And if a loved one doesn't appreciate your help, then maybe it's time for them to figure life out on their own. When you set boundaries, you're not just protecting yourself. You're teaching others to take responsibility for their own lives. Respecting yourself isn't selfish. It's wisdom.